1 in 3. That's the razor's edge chance you'd still be breathing 3 months after being shoved into the belly of an 18th century slave ship. 1 in 3. And those odds were only the start of the nightmare. Stick around, because the chapter between Africa and the Americas is the one most textbooks quietly shuffle past. Picture the Caribbean in the 1650s. Sugar cane sky high, tobacco ripening, cotton begging to be picked. Indigenous populations have been wiped out by disease and guns, and paid Europeans were far too pricey. Solution? Raid the African coast, pack human beings into ships, and wring every ounce of profit from their labor before they collapsed. Liverpool, Nantes, Lisbon, outbound with cloth, guns, rum. In West Africa, swap those goods for people. Across the Atlantic, sell whoever survives. Do it for 3 centuries and you've dragged 12.5 million souls onto the ledger. The numbers feel unreal until you step through the hatch. Before the ocean came the barracudas, coastal pens thick with sweat and dread. Olaudah Equiano, writing decades later, recalled the moment he first saw a slave ship. I was handled and tossed up to see if I were sound. When I looked round and saw a large furnace of boiling water, I no longer doubted my fate. Through a doorway later christened the door of no return, you were branded with a hot iron, rowed out, and lowered into darkness that reeked of tar, vomit, and terror. Headroom? Less than a meter. Men were shackled, right ankle to left ankle, wrist to wrist. Women and children wore lighter irons, yet faced nightly raids from the crew. A single ship might cram 3, sometimes 400 captives. Ventilation came through a few grates. Temperatures pushed past 40 degrees Celsius. The air was so thick with filth that candles guttered out. Ship surgeon Alexander Falconbridge wrote that the floor was so covered in blood and mucus that it resembled a slaughterhouse. Dysentery raced through the hold. People had no choice but to relieve themselves where they lay. In rough seas, seawater mixed with waste, turning chains into blades. Meals arrived twice a day, a scoop of boiled rice or yams, a cup of water. Refused to eat, and the crew forced open your jaws with a speculum oris, a mouth screw. Death was routine. Average mortality hovered around 15%, but 1 in 3 voyages lost a third of its cargo. The 1784 Brooks lost more than half. When storms stretched supplies, captives were thrown overboard. The 1780 One-Zone Massacre became infamous only because owners tried to collect insurance for the 132 people they drowned. In court, no one asked if murder had occurred, only whether jettisoned property warranted reimbursement. Suicide was resistance. Africans believed death returned them home, so they used nails, fingernails, or sheer refusal to drink. Crews countered with nets to catch jumpers and whips to terrorize the rest. Still, Africans rose up. Historians count more than 400 documented revolts. Most failed, yet every uprising rattled the crew and stalled the trade. Imagine the night, absolute dark. The moans of the sick, the rattle of chains, someone whispering prayers in a language you can't decipher. You might be 12, you might be 25, but to the captain you're simply male, 5 feet 4 inches, able-bodied, worth 30 pounds to a merchant in Liverpool. After 2 months of this, land might appear, but you weren't free. You were entering the next ring of hell. Yet culture endured. Captives hummed lullabies their mothers sang, tapped rhythms against the hull, traded words across half a dozen languages. Women braided rice seeds into children's hair, seeds that would sprout new fields in the Carolinas. On ships that allowed deck time, men danced to the drum. Forced entertainment, sure, but feet still remembered ancestral steps. Resistance never stopped. Hunger strikes, coordinated silence, or songs belted so loudly sailors couldn't sleep. The most famous revolt, on the Spanish schooner Amistad in 1839, saw captives seize the vessel and sail up the U.S. coast before capture. Their court case became an abolitionist rallying cry. The Middle Passage tried to turn humans into property. Africans answered by refusing to surrender their humanity. When the ships finally nosed into Barbados, Charleston, or Rio, merchants rubbed captives with oil and tar to mask wounds, then marched them to auction. Families were split forever. A third of those who survived the ocean died within 3 years of seasoning, brutal acclimatization on Caribbean plantations. The profits didn't stay on the docks. They bankrolled the Industrial Revolution. British cotton mills, New England rum distilleries, European insurance houses. Modern giants, Lloyd's of London, Barclays, Aetna, carry capital that traces back to those holds. The racism invented to justify the trade hardened into law, echoing today in redlined housing, policing disparities, mass incarceration. The Middle Passage wasn't a passage at all. It was a portal that turned kidnapping into race, agony into currency, and memory into silence. In 1894, many still believed European colonization of Africa was inseparable from slavery. While this was partly true, Portugal's colonies like Angola supplied countless enslaved people. By the late 1700s, the trade was already declining. Most European colonization actually came after abolition, often justified as a fight against slavery. France used this argument in Dahomey, and Britain took a hard stance in Lagos in 1851, bombarding the city until slavery was abolished and its people freed. Britain later extended abolition across Nigeria. Yet the reality was complex. Domestic slavery persisted long after the trade ended, as officials feared unrest if they moved too fast. In 1897, Britain again invoked slavery when it attacked Benin after a merchant massacre. Reports claimed the king sacrificed hundreds of enslaved people for divine protection. And once the city fell, the British resettled it with freed slaves and offered emancipation to escapees. Still, local elites resisted change, and slavery in places like Benin lingered into the 1920s. African abolitionists existed, especially the enslaved themselves, but many others fought to preserve the institution as part of long-standing traditions. No discussion of slavery can overlook the fact that millions of Africans endured unimaginable cruelty, whether across the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Sahara, or within Africa itself. The sheer scale of deportations from Africa demands special attention. But this suffering was not only the result of outsiders imposing themselves on a powerless continent. Africans were active participants in their own history, helping to build, expand, and sustain the systems of slavery that bound other Africans. Africa's role in supporting slavery is as much a part of its history as its role as a victim of it. While the suffering of millions of enslaved Africans rightly deserves every bit of attention it receives, we cannot ignore that other Africans acted as traders, raiders, and rulers who enabled the enslavement of their own people. Africa was neither uniquely guilty nor uniquely innocent in the story of slavery. It was part of a broader human history, one of suffering, exploitation, and ultimately abolition. Telling this history honestly brings us closer to the truth and places African history where it belongs, within world history, as the history of a continent filled with people who were as complex and flawed as any others. If you found this exploration of the untold aspects of African slavery insightful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more historical content.